English translation, 175th contact, Saturday, 4th September 1982, 12 hours.
Unfortunately, I still cannot give you any new information today regarding the incidents and clarifications of the matters surrounding the allies of the Giza intelligences and their machinations, etc. On the other hand, I also did not come here on their account, but rather because I have once again noticed a severe violation of my orders, which I gave in reference to complying with the times of work and the commencement of work. Yet another time, Ferdinand and Ingrid did not incorporate themselves into these arrangements. Thus, in the later morning hours of today, they left the center in their vehicle, without checking out or announcing their departure on the one hand, and without even asking for permission on the other hand, and without taking up and starting work at 8, Neunors, which I had specifically arranged for both, not to mention that they arrived at the center in the early morning hours at around 3. 0 hours and consequently should have automatically attended to their duty at 8, as it is given by the special regulations which state that after a 30-minute stay at the center, work is to be taken up. With today's date, they have both contravened this arrangement, with the excuse that they are only ordered to appear at the center on Saturday in each case, and following this, they do not have to take up their duty of work until 13 hours. Nevertheless, they make this assertion against better knowledge, even though the ordinal rules and house rules, as well as the statutes and regulations, are well known to them, whereby at least the house rules state that foreign visitors, as well as group members themselves, have to take up their duty of work and collaboration 30 minutes after their arrival at the center. Now, since Ingrid and Ferdinand arrived at the center in the early morning hours and long before 8, 0 hours, and also spent the night there, as a consequence, the arrangements of the rules, etc., automatically have to be obeyed, referring to the 30-minute period up to the commencement of work. But since the reception of work is not possible in the middle of the night, due to the fact that the leaders and all other co-workers are asleep and at rest, work automatically has to be taken up in the morning when work generally begins, so at 8 hours. But Ferdinand and Ingrid ignored this order because they still have not learned to insert themselves into a regular order and to act according to this order. They still think that as core group members in the community, they can act according to their own rules and rights, and can just do whatever pleases them. Thus, they ignored the given order, sat down in their red automobile, and left the center for private interests, from which they first returned at around 11:45 hours. Thus, a grossest duty and order were neglected by them, while also a long-term absence from work originated. However, unauthorized absences from work or arriving to work too late were unanimously decided by the core group to be punished by 20 hundredths of a Swiss franc per missed minute. Through their unauthorized absence and through their disregard of the given rules, Ingrid and Ferdinand have created an absence from work potential in the amount of 4 hours each, because at 11:45 hours, after their return, they did not take up their assigned work either. So together, a total of 8 hours of work were lost, leaving 480 minutes at 20 hundredths of a Swiss franc per minute, which is an amount of 96 Swiss francs. Concerning this, the core group now has to decide as to how and when Ingrid and Ferdinand will pay this amount, which resulted from a gross rule violation. Furthermore, I have to explain that Ingrid and Ferdinand have already been warned several times regarding violations of the rules, etc., and ultimately a threat was issued in writing in the sense that they would be excluded from FIGU after the next violation. Despite this, they have now committed another gross violation, which can now no longer be granted any leniency. Both of them must now bear the consequences, and no more apologies and excuses can find their validity. According to the motto, I thought and so on, or I was of the opinion, etc. Thus, concerning Ferdinand and Ingrid, by today's date, it is to be decided by the entire core group, as a result of yet another and now final offense against the interests of Phi Gu and against my personal arrangements, whether one, Ingrid and Ferdinand are to be excluded immediately and irrevocably, and with all statute-determined consequences from the core group, while complying with the ongoing financial obligations, according to Swiss law and regulations, until the end of 1982, in the amount of 300 Swiss francs per month, according to my newest calculation and determination regarding membership fees, or if Ingrid and Ferdinand are to be incorporated into a temporary exclusion with probation for 2 years, which appears as follows and holds the following consequences in itself, and of which I have become aware through the actions of Louis, who voluntarily incorporated himself into a similar order, which was obviously and advantageously beneficial to him, for which I am also grateful to him. 2. A 2-year temporary exclusion from the core group of Phi Gu, for them to prove and to learn the incorporation into duty and the devotion to duty, as it is regularly given in the group and as the statutes and regulations require. A. As a probation requirement, not only do the statutes, regulations, ordinal rules, and house rules, etc. apply, but also the absolute, exact, and timely observance of the following points. B. Timely fulfillment of the monthly financial obligation to Phi Gu E in the amount of 300 Swiss francs per month for both partners together, starting from the month of August 1982. C. Timely and accurate fulfillment of the regulations for work and the night watch, as arranged up to the 4th of October 1982, and until then, the commencement of work remains unchanged, being the first Saturday at 8 o'clock in the morning. D. From the 5th of October, they are subject to the directives of the statutes and other rules, as well as my new decisions, which will also mean that Ingrid and Ferdinand continue to remain incorporated into all duties, so also into the night watch and into the Sunday service. E. If both of them have a night watch but no Sunday service to perform, then in each case, they have to leave the center at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the following Sunday, if they do not still have to be included in an urgent task. F. If both of them have to carry out a Sunday service, then they should be allowed to stay in the center until 24 hours on that respective Sunday. G. The monthly 8-hour workday also continues to remain as a duty, as well as all other duties. This 8-hour workday must take place on a Saturday, and extra work and overtime hours are just as desirable on this day as also on other days. She upon the completion of tasks, etc. in the center. Ingrid and Ferdinand have to leave this in each case no later than midnight of that respective workday, if there is still not a night watch or Sunday service that has to be completed. I. An appearance in the center, starting from the 4th of October, may occur on a workday just shortly before the commencement of work, but this must be carried out no later than 30 minutes before. J. Overnight stays in or on the grounds of the center are prohibited as of the 5th of October, and this also applies to opportunities for spending the night in one's own mobile home on the grounds of the center. The following rights are revoked for Ingrid and Ferdinand during the 2-year probationary period. 1. The planned and already permitted animal husbandry. 2. Contact report reference. For each new report, it can only be made accessible to them in the form that a reading of the contents takes place for them. 3. Participation in group meetings of any kind, except by my special arrangements. 4. Meditation in the circle and in the center. 5. Direct access to the group. 6. visits and overnight stays in the center or on the premises. 7. Admission to information and participation with and in group concerns. At today's meeting, all of these points must be brought forward by the Board of Directors, and I will see to it that this is done within the regular framework. Through this, the whole community will be given the choice to decide on one or the other, so a joint decision must be made. But if such does not come about, as a result of a neutral vote, then I reserve the right to make a decision tonight on my own. If the second variation of my proposal is eventually decided on by a collective group decision, then Ingrid and Ferdinand have to insert themselves perfectly and without any other minor or greater offenses during the 2 years of probation, after which their FIGU membership will then continue in accordance with their previous membership, under the calculation of the time of the old existing provisional membership. But if it should happen that, after the continuation of their membership after the 2 years or during the probation period, an offense is committed once again, then an immediate and definitive and irrevocable exclusion must occur. With a good probation during the first 12 months, I reserve the right to shorten or to annul completely the period of 2 years. Concerning the intended animal husbandry, it is given that from now on, the group must strive, as far as possible, to carry this out and realize this, because neither now nor at a later time during the probation will the animal husbandry be permitted for the two of them at the center. This could only be the case again if they have truly proved themselves, and thus give some assurance that they actually insert themselves into and observe the given order. However, a renewed commitment to the animal husbandry of the two could no longer occur on a private basis, but rather only within the context that the animals were the property of the whole group. Now, if the second variation of my order should find its validity by the whole group, and despite the decision intervening for them, Ingrid and Ferdinand still feel capable of agreeing to the keeping of livestock and the procurement of animal feed, then it should be allowed that they can take care of this procurement, but only in the context that these acquisitions are made in the name of the group and as its property. The involvement in and with the animals and their products, however, could also only be done in the aforementioned sense of the directives of the given provisions, whereby Ingrid and Ferdinand could be allowed to maintain the animals and to produce the products on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday of each week, but they cannot be allowed to spend the night in the center in accordance with my determination.
This is all so damn unpleasant, but to be honest, I expected now that a quick, final exclusion would result.
Actually, that was also the recommendation of our committee. But just in time, I remembered Lewis's conduct, who similarly requested for himself a temporary exclusion from the core group for 2 years, which was granted by a core group decision, which was very valuable for Louis and brought several positive changes for him. That is why I thought that such an attempt could be of value for Ingrid and Ferdinand, which is why I brought it to the attention of our committee, so now both variations exist, which are to be decided on by the entire core group. After the previous experiences of the past few months, referring to the many positive changes of the group members, a good and impartial decision should now truly be able to be expected of them, which is why we want to place this serious decision into their hands and expect their judgment.
You are really fair if you do not commit another error in this again, and pass another false judgment, as this has often happened in the last few years because of your ignorance in matters of Earth-human thinking and conduct. Concerning this, you should be more careful to penetrate further into the true secrets of Earth-human reasoning, by what means you would remain spared from many disappointments.
That is probably of correctness, but we must not explore the ultimate secrets of the human being in this regard, which, unfortunately, cannot exclude failures. But should our decision be positive on the 4th of October, then in this regard, we will no longer rely on our analyses alone, concerning which we have already set up extremely permissible boundaries, but in an increasing and authoritative form, we will allow your assessments to catch us up in all these matters and will let ourselves be guided by these. In this connection, in terms of assessing the Earth humans, we have made the finding that you are very far superior to us with your methods and knowledge, and if we make use of this, your knowledge, then it can no longer be missing.
As you mean, but tell me, how do things stand in the matters surrounding your spiritual leaders, whom I am crazily supposed to instruct in certain things?
The relevant preparations are in full swing, and everything proceeds as planned, so you should still give your first instruction before the end of this year.
I still feel really small and stupid, my son, an earthling who is to teach higher forms of life.
You should not always think of your earthly body as being so insignificant, but rather consider the origin of your spirit form. It is truly amazing how you always identify yourself with all of terrestrial life. But this might actually be the real reason why you can live without prejudice, or almost without prejudice, among the life forms of this world.
Being a barbarian just has its charms, even if this barbarian is damned and cursed very often, extensively, and out of the deepest unconsciousness.
I know this about you, but I also know that you always see bright rays of hope, and that you also rejoice over even the smallest and slightest successes, as each one always allows you to relax. Thus, you rejoice over Silvano, whom you ought to greet for me with the statement that he makes pleasant progress and that he achieves a more satisfactory performance than what was still the case at the beginning of the time of the 6-month period. Also, all others are to be included in this, even if they are, without exception, often still grumbling and mentally resisting themselves against the given orders. Jacobus, of course, is also included in this, even though in reference to him, it is still objectionable that his mindset still leaves very much to be desired, especially in terms of love for the next one, neighborly love, and the integration into the laws and recommendations of the natural creational order. Urgently, he has much to learn and to acquire, in order to develop a true love, to prevent hate-filled, insulting, and harmful words and thoughts, and not to be always joyful when negative and hostile-minded earthly people, etc., suffer harm. Such actions hardly correspond to how a person, who is one who lives in the truth and love, thinks and acts, just as the very often illogical and so-called vulgar language and pronunciation of Jacobus does not correspond to the measure of a human being who expresses oneself in truth, love, and knowledge. It would be very gratifying if he would be careful to control his language, as well as his thoughts and actions.
He will now say that, of course, he is the only one who will be asked to pay, being singled out.
It was his personal desire for a long time that his mistakes should be shown to him. I remember his words very well, through which he expressed this desire to you.
I remember this very well, and I think that this has been beneficial for him. But what still powerfully disturbs me in the group.
Everything is well known to me, but you should write these things up in a better form than the wording of the ordinal rules, and then submit them to us, after which we will then decide whether the forms of interpretation are accurate.
You did not let me finish speaking.
It is our common nature, for we often understand the questions before they are uttered.
Okay, then you know this, and on this occasion, I will get behind this work. But tell me, are you aware of the fact that a few days ago, someone robbed himself of his own life, which has caused us a lot of difficulties and trouble here at the center?
I know that, yes. A very unfortunate incident, but this is just the consequence of the fact that those who reject the truth and those who abuse the truth, schemers and liars, as well as forgers of truth, always reap their own wages, either through their own and self-directed hand, or by the hand of their followers and believers. Now, the man who recently acted upon himself, through the destruction of his own physical life, was allied with the brothers H and K, under whose direction he also extensively worked against you, against the whole group, and against our entire mission. Influenced by the brothers, his insidious, destructive, and truth-displacing nature was further open to such activities, which is why he ignored all truth and worked against it. But recently, it has turned out that he has succumbed to his own destructive impulses, in that he deprived himself of his own life, which happened for the following reason. As was very often the case in recent years, he illegally crept around during his regular work, spying on the terrain of your center, namely on the second overlook on the eastern side of the buildings. Hidden behind some bushes, he watched the center and was suddenly startled by a sound at the opposite edge of the forest. Then what he saw there let everything collapse badly within himself, and it became uncontrollable for him. Namely, Andron, the one who knows how to assert himself, who is the largest in body mass among our allies, and who stands at over 5 terrestrial meters tall, materialized there and slowly walked towards those bushes across the meadow where the spying man kept himself hidden. This frightened, cruel one suddenly realized that you, your mission, and we had been defamed by the brothers H and K, and that throughout his life he had acted inferiorly and wrongly. He recognized that Andron could not be a terrestrial life form, but rather had to originate from another planet somewhere because, according to his knowledge, there were no such large human beings on the Earth, let alone one who could materialize himself at an edge of a forest. Full of horror and sudden realization, he ran away, while his thoughts began to be confused.
Annotation on Quetzal's statement.
The man who judged himself was an army guard by profession and a resident of the canton of Thurgau. He was widely known for denigrating Hinterschmidruti and its residents and dubbing them nutcases. Wherever he was, whether at work, at his place of residence, or in inns he frequented, he made disparaging and slanderous remarks about the Figu, Hinterschmidruti and its residents. His contemptuous speeches would still have been bearable, because human beings think what they want anyway. Much worse was the fact that he could not refrain from causing considerable damage in the Hinterschmidruti time and again. One of his regularly recurring violations was one he carried out on freshly planted young trees, cutting away all their branches at night and then splitting the young trunks in half so that there was no longer any chance of the little trees recovering. After his attacks, they were dead and useless, died and had to be replaced willy-nilly. The damage caused by the security guard alone amounted to thousands of francs. But that was by no means all, for he was extremely imaginative and proactive in causing damage and mischief. Cars were popular targets for his malicious attacks. For example, he enjoyed spreading nails and crow's feet on roads and car parks, knowing that he could give nighttime drivers home from the center a nasty surprise if they were not prepared, and suddenly found themselves in the middle of the night without a spare tire because they had more than one flat tire to replace. He also liked to catapult stones and other projectiles from the hilltop pulpit at night onto the parked cars of the center residents and demolish the car windows with the projectiles or make large and deep dents in the vehicles. He landed a special throw one night when he hurled large stones onto the roof of the center building, which was only covered with thin Eternit tiles, which at that time would have had to serve for several more years. The security guards' nightly stone-throwing attacks left large holes in the roof of the main building, allowing rainwater to seep in and pour down into the living quarters. Particularly affected were Jacobus with his bedroom, where rainwater dripped into his bed at night, and Billy and his family, who had to place buckets in their living quarters, like Jacobus, to catch the water dripping from the ceiling. Since these conditions could not be tolerated for years, the entire roof of the residential part had to be torn off by a roofing company and re-roofed at a time when the FIGU finances did not actually allow such violent actions. So there was nothing left to do but to knock on the bank's door and take out a loan by increasing the mortgage debt. This was the only way to pay the astronomical damage bill of fire. $42,000 for the new roof. For the group members, this was an almost unaffordable sum at the time, which set them far back financially. However, with regard to the roof of the main building, the whole thing was only the first prank of the amiable contemporary, because no sooner had the roof of the residential part of the house been re-roofed and put in order than larger stones came crashing down again at night, but this time on the thin slate roof of the barn part. Of course, holes were also made there, which caused rainwater to penetrate the building, soaking the roof timbers and causing them to rot, in addition to the fact that the hay was also affected by the damp and infected with grey mold, which meant that large parts had to be disposed of. Of course, this hay was then missing for the cows and cattle, which is why expensive hay fodder had to be bought for several $1,000 over a number of years. This was because the FIGU and its members did not have the necessary capital to also have this roof torn down and re-roofed. It was only in the course of later years that the necessary money for a new roof could be raised again through a loan, which was somewhat larger than the first one. In addition to the roofing, various rotten or already rotten roof beams also had to be removed and replaced by a carpentry company. In the end, the total damage amounted to approximately CHF 100,000, which was solely due to the damage-causing machinations of the security guard. But that was not enough. At night, the man was only too happy to prowl around the center grounds, trying to spy and peeping through half-closed curtain slits into the bedrooms and living quarters in order to indulge his voyeuristic inclinations as far as possible. But he also spied through the kitchen windows, as was noticed on several occasions, although he could always disappear without a trace in a flash into the darkness of the night when people ran after him. The fact is that none of the Hinterschmidt-Ruti residents or out-of-town group members ever harmed the man or said a bad word to him. At the center, he was only known by hearsay because he never found it necessary and apparently also had no interest in getting acquainted with a group member. Obviously, he was only interested in insulting, denigrating and damaging the Hinterschmidt-Ruti denizens. The foreign rascals newcomers are often maliciously called that by the locals, precisely because they were foreigners in the place. But one reason was also found in the fact that the FIGU members ploughed up the meadow on the site of the Haus Hügelkansel and planted a potato field and an onion garden. This was a particular thorn in the guard's side, because until then the Swiss Air Force had used the overlook as a landing and maneuver site for its helicopters, which was now made impossible by the cultivation of the field and garden. Consequently, the young trees planted at the edge of the field were also maltreated, which is why new plants had to be planted several times. Things only improved when Billy and some group members erected a fence across the overlook, illuminated the area around the center at night with powerful floodlights, and installed several television cameras to monitor everything day and night. Billy did all the installations himself, while all the necessary material was paid for by some group members from their own earnings, thus finally creating more security and order. Also, the night watch was then introduced, which contributed considerably to the fact that the malicious damage production decreased and everything slowly returned to normal. But the time had not yet come. Obviously, the guards spying at all possible and impossible times of the day or night was not his real or only intention when he was unlawfully on our premises, because his real aim was to cause damage wherever possible. If the group members in the center were not vigilant enough, the troublemaker would uproot the freshly planted vegetables in the garden as soon as the group members working in it had cleared the field. And even later, when the garden was fenced in and equipped with garden doors, they were hardly closed when the mischief maker crept in. More than once, the group members had to replant the whole trampled garden because the mischief was only noticed the next day when the sun was shining again and all the seedlings had withered beyond repair. The troublemaker and disturber of the peace pulled off a particularly wicked stunt in the summer of 1980. In that year, the field on the overlook was cleaned up for the first time, and then potatoes were planted. This was a special seed that Billy had received from Quetzal, and from which a bountiful harvest was hoped for in late summer. Not only because it was an extraterrestrial seed, everyone was hard at work, but also because the hoped-for harvest was easy on the small wallets of the eaters at the center. So the hoped-for harvest was very welcome. The overlook was not yet fenced off from the street as it is today, but was freely accessible from the street, which of course only suited the special little friend, because he had once again thought up a special trick for the center residents. The security guard had collected Medus bitter dock seeds, Rumex obtusifolius L., also known as blunt-leaved dock, Blacked, Baccater, Lendiwurze, and Flackerblätter, which he then slyly sowed by the sack over the potato field during the night. Bitterdock is a very fast germinating, extremely stubborn weed that is very difficult to eradicate. It roots down to a depth of 9 meters and spreads rapidly not only via root remains, but also via its seeds, if they are not constantly and tirelessly picked out or combated with chemical agents. The only and really effective remedies against bitter dock are chemical agents that are sprayed on the leaves, and a granulate that has to be applied directly to the germinal heart of the plant with a so-called bitter dock gun. Through the air and plant moisture or through rain, the plant poison then reaches the inside of the bitter dock plant via the cotyledons, where it spreads throughout the weed stock and into the roots, causing the plant to die. If, however, the cotyledon heart of the bitter dock is not hit exactly, or if it rains too soon after the spray has been applied to the leaves, the sprayed leaves must not be rained on for 3 hours so that the chemicals can soak into the pores of the leaves. Then the whole labor of love was in vain and the action must be repeated. When it came to the harvest, which the group members had hoped for so much, everyone experienced a very nasty surprise, because the whole field was so densely overgrown with bitter dock that Jacobus had to use the tractor to carry off 12 large, full trailer wagons of weeds, the very black bitter dock that had to be laboriously dug up and then repeatedly controlled for several years by digging, spraying, and granulating. Due to the densely growing bitter dock, which deprived the soil of all its nourishment, the potato harvest was of course very meagre, but FIGU members were then busy for years trying to control the bitter dock plague on the overlook field.
Jacobus, transporting one of the 12 loads of bitter dock from the potato field on the hill above the house. Photo, Billy. Jacobus transporting one of the 12 loads of bitter dock from the potato field on the hill above the house. Photo Billy. Jacobus unloading one of the 12 loads of bitter dock from the potato field on the hill above the house. Photo Billy. Jacobus unloading one of the 12 loads of bitter dock from the potato field on the hill above the house. Photo Billy.
Another time, a few years later, other outrages of the amiable guard arose again. As a result of strange decisions by the Agricultural Office, Figu had acquired its own cows and cattle, so that no sewage system with pumping station to the amount of about 150,000 had to be built from Hinterschmidruti to Schmidruti. The troublemaker was not above paying a visit to Hinterschmidruti just when no one was around one afternoon. The animals were grazing peacefully in the meadows, securely fenced in and kept on the pasture by the regular electricity pulse of the cattle keeper. This obviously did not suit the rascal, and being a country kid, he knew very well what he had to do to impose yet another unnecessary chore and much trouble on the centre residents. So he tore the battery-powered cattle guard away and threw it down deep into the ravine in the nearby forest, where it naturally lay demolished and no longer usable. He then tore down the wire and stakes of the pasture fence and drove the 2 cows and both cattle out of the pasture, driving them ahead of him through the garden and the borders to the residential building, trampling everything in the process. In front of the main building, he just left them to themselves and made off. Of course, a large part of the vegetables in the garden and all the flowers in the borders were gone and completely destroyed. Centre visitors were also always a thorn in his side, and if he could not drive them away with his vicious talk, he simply came up with another effective means. When he once saw French visitors who wanted to visit the centre taking photos of the centre from the road above the overlook while walking along the main road to Sitzburg, he once again saw his hour had come. He immediately notified the military police and accused the harmless walkers of spying on the military site and the rocket launching site and of having photographed everything. Whereupon the police, of course, moved out in a flash and promptly arrested the dumbfounded and frightened Frenchman. Only after some time did it turn out that the Frenchmen who were taken away were absolutely harmless and in no way interested in the military compound, but that they had only intended to visit Billy and the Figu after they had been released. However, they naturally preferred to go home without having achieved anything, because obviously a visit to the centre seemed to them to be decidedly too dangerous after their experience. Billy only learned about this incident years later, however, when he requested his documents in Bern in the early 90s after the Swiss officials' affair had come to light and was able to inspect them. The incident described above had been reported in detail to Bern by the military police and the cantonal police, including all the names. After the guard's suicide, Billy learned from Ketzel that it was the guard who had committed all the evil deeds and misdeeds on the centre grounds. Ketzel tried to get to the bottom of the matter after the guard's encounter with Andron, so he investigated the suicide and clarified everything. And as Ketzel investigated, it turned out that the guard, after having met Andron almost up close and personal, and thus having seen him, went completely crazy and went straight to his guardroom, where he shot himself with his service pistol. He obviously could not cope with Andron's unwanted encounter and realized that he had acted wrongly towards the centre's inhabitants and the Figu in general. Apparently, as Ketzel later explained, the guard could not cope with the encounter with the giant Andron became unconscious within minutes, and took his own life.
Then, unfortunately, it did not take too long before he robbed himself in fear, terror, and confusion of his own life.
This, of course, will not be spread according to the truth.
That would be impossible because he told no one of his experience. Thus, he took his secret to the grave. For this reason, only speculation surrounded the termination of his life, after which, through false clues, reasons were then found for his suicide. The family members and co-workers strained themselves to put their thoughts together, etc., from which they now assumed to know why the man had driven himself to death. But the truth is different from what these humans assume. Moreover, the reason for the outbreak of his confusion of consciousness lies differently with those who were hostile-minded to you, us, and the mission.
You speak in riddles, my son.
Yet it was not very long ago when we explained to you that all those who concern themselves against the truth and fight this also work against you and against your and our mission, and they slanderously and destructively work against us, such that all of them become the bearers of their own rewards. But this, as it was explained to you, also applies to those who slanderously and untruthfully boast of contacts with us or other life forms that are foreign to the earth, even though these do not correspond to the truth. It was explained to you that all these miserable and unfortunate creatures, for this and for their falsity, mendacity, cravings for intrigues, and denial of truth, as well as their distortion of reality, have very vicious and miserable wages to bargain for because they prepare and summon their own destruction through their shameful and destructive activities, in the sense that they produce their own altered state of consciousness and destruction of consciousness, as well as confusion of consciousness, which lead to the complete psychological destruction of the same and which cause suicidal actions, thus the self-destruction and suicide of one's own life. Others will be called to account by their own followers and believers. Thus, they receive their wages by their own hand and actions.
I know this, it was explained to me, but you have not responded to my question concerning those who...
That is of correctness, it was omitted in my explanation. Thereupon, I addressed therewith that a younger man, who became hostile-minded towards your and our mission through the brothers H and K, has fallen into a confusion of consciousness, which is designated as insanity. As a result, he was interned in an insane asylum, from which there will be for him no return to the so-called healthy society. A second young man in Bern has fallen victim to a fanatical sectarian insanity, which has already led to the fact that his acquaintances and family make serious efforts towards likewise committing him to a mental hospital. Those are two cases, in addition to some other similar phenomena which have arisen recently. With the year 1982, the time has come where the effects of this against you, us, and the mission start to drive these evildoers into their own self-generated psychopathy, as this is also the case with H, who already viciously impaired his psyche in his hatred and in his vindictiveness toward you, and our mission, such that his thinking already exhibits the unmistakable characteristics of the pathological psychopath. So with him, everything only depends on the length of time until his psychopathy finds its final and irreversible form.
That is all damn unpleasant, even if these self-generated rewards for these poor creatures are nothing more than an unstoppable success of their own actions and thinking. It is really very unfortunate and unpleasant, and somehow one should be able to help these poor creatures, nevertheless.
Unfortunately, that is absolutely impossible because their hatred and their vindictiveness, as well as their blindness, allow them immediately to turn every reason and logic within them to the opposite. Now with that, my friend, it should be enough for today because my duties call me again. Goodbye.
Take care and loving greetings to all.